June 10, 1943. Richmond, California, the Kaiser Shipyards. Dawn lifts over a forest of cranes and scaffolding, turning riveted steel and wet timber into a silhouette of industry. The air tastes of salt oil and hot metal. A diesel haze hangs like a promise above the river. Men move through the yard in tight, practiced flows, welders hunched against sparks, riggers singing a rhythm to haul plate after plate, and labor gangs pushing wheeled jigs like battleships on dollies. A Liberty ship rises in a day from the skeleton of a keel to the curve of a bow, and every inch of it is stamped with the urgency of war. On a rain-silvered gangway, a column of escorted prisoners arrives. 12 German soldiers, boots still muddied from transit, hands bound with thin rope that the guards pretend not to notice. They shuffle beneath the fly of boiler smoke, faces hollowed by months in captivity and by the lean rationing they have heard about at home. At their front stands Feldwebel Karl Becker, 32, a sapper turned NCO whose eyes are sharp beneath a weathered cap. He has seen tanks born and die on muddy training grounds, has watched armor plates rolled and welded in measured hours back in the Reich, but nothing in his experience has prepared him for this place. Corporal James O'Malley, a civilian foreman turned camp liaison and a man with grease under his nails and a Midwestern drawl, briefs the little group with practiced calm. "You'll remain behind the lines," he says, voice carrying over the din. "You look, you don't touch. Keep moving and you'll be fine." The Americans who flank the Germans wear khaki and steel helmets. Their smiles are brisk, almost apologetic. This is not a spectator tour for Hollywood. It is an ordered, supervised exposure to the engine that will drown the Axis in tonnage. Kaiser himself is there, not in the polished suit of myth but in oil-streaked overalls, sleeves rolled, clipboard tucked under an arm. He nods once toward the prisoners with a curt, dismissive motion. Men here are focused on the job. Welders like musicians at their stations strike arcs that throw daylight into molten seams. The rhythm is relentless and astonishing. Plate after plate is tacked, seams dressed, bulkheads slide into place as if the hull were a giant, precise jigsaw. Men call measurements in feet and inches, not in the cadences of parade ground orders but in a practical, efficient shorthand that turns design into product. Becker's gaze follows a set of men pushing a completed section toward a floating slipway. The section rides on rollers, framed and balanced, and the whole assembly slides into the water with a dull, hydraulic sigh. Then workers leap, ropes become lines and cranes guide the piece into position. The motion is choreography, practiced and unromantic. A welder, a black visor down, arcs a line that sears steel like a pen on paper. The seam cools, a workman taps it with a hammer and it sings, a short, bright note. Becker's hands curl reflexively, remembering the way his own crew had cursed and hammered at tank skirts in Polish winters. He feels a prickle at the back of his neck that is not just cold. Nearby, a stenciled sign reads in large block letters, "Liberty Ship, 42 days standard." Someone has scrawled a different number in grease across the corner, 6 days. The scrawl is almost a dare. A foreman named Joe Martinez sees Becker reading and comes forward, extending a dark, oil-stained hand. "You think we're magic?" he asks, half laughing. Becker looks at the hand, then at the man, then at the field of motion before him. "No," he answers in careful German. "You are faster." The yard speed is no accident. Kaiser has taken the factory line and grafted it onto shipbuilding. Where once a hull took seasons to raise by rivets and patient craftsmen, here teams work in sequence. One station fits, another welds, another tests. Welding replaces riveting, prefabrication replaces on-site fitting. Jigs and templates enforce sameness. Interchangeable sections snap together like parts of a machine. A young welder named Thomas Reed explains it without pride. "You don't build a ship by one man's skill anymore. You build it by the rhythm of the whole yard." The rhythm, Becker senses, is a force that erases individual glory in favor of output. He watches as a ladder of scaffoldings is lowered and a mast raised. Men cut ropes, shout measurements, and the hull takes the shape of a promise. An engineer passes a blueprint to a supervisor. The paper is as thick with markings as any German ordnance plan, but here every mark is a step toward something produced, not an idea stalled by bureaucracy or resource hogging. Becker thinks of his homeland. Factories working on schedules stretched thin by shortages, skilled labor dispersed by conscription, materials diverted to distant fronts. He remembers waiting weeks for a spare part, for a length of armor plate. Here in this yard plates arrive by the dozen. A young German, Oberstfreiter Ernst Vogel, murmurs to Becker, his voice small, "They build a ship faster than we build a panzer." The words are incredulous and quiet, but they carry like a seed. Around them, men shout over pneumatic hammers and the metallic staccato of progress, but Becker's mind has already begun to tally up the implications. Tonnage means fuel, fuel means mobility, mobility means the ability to replace losses and to sustain campaigns. If ships can be produced with such speed, how can a nation with slower, more centralized production hope to stand? As the tour closes and the prisoners are shepherded back toward the transport, Becker's eyes linger on the hull sliding into the channel. The structure is half-finished and astonishingly whole in its presence. He has come to see an enemy's heart. Instead, he has seen a new kind of weapon, one that does not fire but feeds. He feels, with the panic of an engineer who understands systems, that the calculus of war has shifted, not only on the battlefield but in the quiet, humming heartbeat of mass production. The bus grinds away from the yard, leaving cranes like iron trees against the sky. Becker presses his forehead to the cold glass and watches Richmond recede. The noise dwindles to a distant roar. He does not speak. Words would not catch the shape of what he has seen. Inside his chest, however, a worry settles and refuses to be shaken. If industry can outbuild bullets, then defeat is not merely a battlefield event, it is an economic verdict. The ride back to the POW camp is quiet at first. The road snakes inland, through a haze of eucalyptus and factory smoke, leaving behind the clangor of the shipyard. The sunlight flashes across the windows in staccato bursts, as if the day itself is marking time. Inside the military transport bus, the prisoners sit in 2 straight rows, backs stiff, hands resting in their laps. The guards, rifles resting between their knees, watch but do not speak. The only sound is the rumble of tires and the occasional metallic rattle of the suspension. It is Vogel who breaks the silence. "You saw it," he says, rubbing his thumb across his calloused fingers as though holding a tool that is no longer there. "It takes us months to finish a Panzer IV. If we even have the steel plates on time. If the rails aren't bombed. If we have fuel for the forges. If..." His voice trails off into the hollow space of the bus. Becker doesn't respond. He is staring straight ahead, his thoughts grinding louder than the engine. He has always believed the Reich's industry was formidable, brutal, efficient, total. But the Kaiser shipyard had been something else entirely. It wasn't just the speed, it was the coordination. The synchronicity. It was a system that did not depend on tradition or pride or master craftsmen. It was a conveyor belt with a nation behind it. "There were women," murmurs another POW, his tone quietly shaken. "Women welding. Women fitting steel. Like they had done it all their lives." It is said with disbelief because in Germany women were expected to support the war, but from kitchens, nurseries and uniform mending stations. Factories were the domain of men, of guilds, of rigid pride. But America had simply dispensed with such rules. Anyone who could hold a torch could change the shape of the war. O'Malley, sitting in the front seat, hears the murmuring and glances back. He doesn't speak their language fluently, but he knows a tone of realization when he hears one. A slight smile touches his face. There is no cruelty in it, only understanding. He has been around POWs long enough to know that seeing the shipyards hits harder than any propaganda leaflet dropped from a bomber. Back in Berlin, propaganda ministers had been feeding the German population a steady diet of superiority. Superior soldiers, superior engineering, superior will. But propaganda never built a cargo vessel. Propaganda didn't weld steel. The bus rumbles through the gates of the camp, a ring of barbed wire and wooden guard towers under the wide California sky. Compared to the bleak conditions German soldiers imagined enemy prison camps to hold, this place is almost shockingly orderly. Clean barracks. Running water. Gardens. The prisoners are under guard, but they are also fed, housed, and, in a quiet, tactical irony, shown the strength of the country that captured them. Becker steps off the bus and feels the gravel crunch under his boots. He pauses, trying to shake off the echo of hammers from the shipyard, but it lingers as insistently as memory. A ship in 6 days. 6 days. He had once overseen the construction of a tank chassis, a project that dragged into 3 weeks because one foundry shipment was late. The difference is not skill. The difference is not manpower. The difference is process. Inside the barracks, the men sit on their bunks, their voices hushed but urgent. There are no boasts anymore, no confident talk of German genius or destiny. The shock is almost physical. It sits heavy in the air like humidity before a storm. Becker lies back on his cot, staring up at the rafters. He sees the cranes again. The welders. The order. The pace. He thinks about fuel convoys to the Eastern Front. Trains halted by bomb tracks. Tanks abandoned in the snow. A war machine that looks unstoppable until you measure it against one that is simply faster. He closes his eyes and whispers a sentence his men do not hear. If they can build ships faster than we can lose them, then the war is already decided. Outside the sun sets. The camp lights flicker on. The world continues to move forward, and now Becker knows exactly how fast. February 17, 1943. Richmond, California. 3:42 a.m. A thin marine layer hangs over the bay, softening the glow of floodlights that burn all night across the Kaiser shipyards. Fog rolls low around the cranes, making them look like the silhouettes of giants frozen mid-stride. The shift whistle hasn't blown yet, but the place is already alive. Steel wheels clatter, overhead cables hum, welders adjust their masks and forklifts rumble between stacks of prefabricated hull sections. There is no silence here. Not at dawn. Not at midnight. Not ever. This is a factory that does not sleep. Hundreds of workers move with instinctive efficiency. Most are new to industrial work. Farmers, mechanics, housewives, teenagers, retirees, migrants from Texas and Oklahoma who fled the Dust Bowl, Black Americans who left the Jim Crow South for steady pay, Chinese and Filipino laborers who were once shut out of factory jobs entirely. Here they stand shoulder to shoulder, holding torches that throw sparks into the air like fireflies. In Germany, master welders are trained for years. Here they are trained in weeks. And yet the steel holds. Inside the hull of a half-completed Liberty ship, the noise is deafening. Hammer strikes echo against steel ribs, welding arcs bloom with blinding white light, and fitting crews move like ants through a maze of ladders and temporary scaffolding. Work gangs tighten bolts, align plates, and guide huge prefabricated segments into place, sections so large that cranes swing them into position like puzzle pieces. A foreman checks his clipboard. He does not shout. There is no chaos to corral. The schedule moves the workers. Not the other way around. Women in bandanas and coveralls pass each other on narrow gangways, their hands steady, their tools worn. One wipes her brow with a gloved wrist and continues welding without missing a beat. A young man, no more than 19, guides a crane, his fingers lightly resting on levers, face illuminated by the glow of signal lanterns. He has never seen the Atlantic Ocean. But the ship he helps build may cross it within weeks. The Liberty ship below them has no name yet, just a number stamped on its hull, EC2 is C1. But soon it will carry ammunition, food, trucks, medical crates, the lifeblood of armies across the sea. Across the yard, a supervisor stands with two visitors, U.S. Navy officers in blue peacoats. One officer checks his pocket watch and nods. Hull 732, the supervisor says. We started her last Tuesday. The younger officer raises his eyebrow. Tuesday. 6 days ago, the supervisor clarifies, smiling in that impossibly casual American way. We'll get her in the water by tomorrow afternoon if the wind holds. The officer simply whistles. God help the men trying to stop us. And in a barracks just outside the shipyard fence, Becker wakes before dawn, unable to sleep. The memory of the yard feels unreal, like something glimpsed through smoke or a dream. But it isn't a dream. He still hears the tempo of rivet guns in his skull. He steps outside and stands in the early morning chill. The sky is still dark, but just visible on the horizon is a faint orange glow, the forever burning lights of the shipyard. Work is happening right now, while he stands still. In Germany, factories falter when bombers pass overhead. Here the war is distant and steel flows like water. Becker thinks of the Eastern Front, of frozen tanks, halted fuel lines, supply convoys swallowed by Russian mud, factories stripped of labor to feed the front. He thinks of the Wehrmacht's reliance on precision parts, on artisanal engineering, on craftsmanship so meticulous that any disruption rippled through the system like a fracture spreading through glass. He realizes with a slow dread that tightens his chest. Germany built weapons of quality. America built weapons of quantity. And in this war, quantity was winning. Becker closes his eyes and breathes out slowly. The camp comes awake behind him, guards murmuring, a kitchen being prepared, boots thudding faintly on gravel. But his gaze does not move. It is fixed on the horizon. On the light that never goes dark. The light of industry at war. February 18, 1943. Richmond Shipyard No. 2. 15:11 hours. The sun hangs low, casting long shadows across the dry dock. A crowd gathers, thousands of workers still in their welding jackets, leather gloves and soot-smeared goggles. Families stand on crates. Children wave American flags handed out at the gate. The air tastes of hot steel and sea salt, with a faint bite of diesel exhaust drifting from the harbor. And at the center of it all stands the newest Liberty ship. Hull 732. Her plates are raw, unpainted in places, still showing streaks from the welding arcs. She looks plain, functional. No sweeping curves. No elegant lines like the great ocean liners. She is a box made of steel, a blunt instrument meant to cross oceans, not glide over them. But she is complete. 7 days ago she was piles of plate metal and crates of rivets. Now, she floats. Becker stands behind a chain-link fence with the other German POW labor detail. They have been marched down from the camp, flanked by 2 guards. The POWs expected a lecture. A propaganda display. Some sort of American theatrical show. But instead, it feels like a celebration. A band plays, brass horns, drums, bold and proud music that echoes across the water. Workers slap each other on the back, laugh, cheer, whistle. No one is stoic. No one is pretending not to feel something. They are proud of what they made. The foreman from the welding shed steps forward, holding a rope tied to a champagne bottle. Beside him stands a shipyard welder in a dusty denim jacket. A woman with her hair wrapped in a polka dot bandana. She is the sponsor. She swings the bottle. It shatters, glass bursts, champagne sprays, cheers erupt. The ship begins to move. Slowly at first. Then with gathering momentum. The crowd roars, hats fly into the air, workers shout into the wind. And Becker watches as 14,000 tons of steel slide into the water with a thunderous splash that sends a wave rolling back across the shore. The ship settles, rocks gently, and then rights herself, engine silent, awaiting assignment. She is not beautiful. But she is unstoppable. A POW beside Becker whispers in German, voice hollow. They built that faster than we finish repairing a tank treads. Another answers. That ship can carry 4 tanks. Becker swallows hard. He remembers the factory back home, the shortages, the delays, the desperation. Mechanics stripping parts from wrecks just to keep one panzer running. Engineers writing reports begging for labor and fuel. Men dying for want of a single bearing, a single seal, a single drum of gasoline. Here. There is no shortage. There is abundance. With every ship launched, the war tilts further. A Liberty ship is not a weapon. Not directly. It has no guns, no armor, no glory. It is not spoken of in speeches. It does not make frontline headlines. But without it, no soldier fights. No tank rolls. No bomber flies. War runs on fuel, food, ammunition, spare parts, the invisible cargo of unseen ships. And Becker realizes, Germany is not just fighting American soldiers. Germany is fighting American industry. An industry that looks endless. As the shipyard crowd begins to disperse, Becker lowers his head, breathes deeply, and understands something he will never say aloud. The war is already lost. March 1943. Inside the German POW barracks at Camp White. A thin frost covers the ground outside, but inside the long wooden hall, the warmth from a coal stove seeps slowly outward. The men sit in silence around a rough-hewn table, the quiet punctuated only by the clatter of metal cutlery against tin plates. Tonight's meal is beef stew, thick, hearty, steaming, served with fresh bread and a cup of black coffee. It is not luxury. But to men who have come from the Eastern Front, from Stalingrad, from retreat and starvation and winter marches, it feels impossible. Becker holds his spoon midair. Across from him sits another POW, Corporal Ralph Dieter, pencil in hand. On a scrap of brown paper torn from the side of a supply crate, he writes numbers slowly, carefully, as though afraid the pencil will break under the weight of the realization. 14,000 tons, in 7 days, he murmurs. He scratches again. That is, 2,000 tons per day of ship. Becker nods. Dieter continues. We can build a Panzer IV in, what? 4 weeks? 5. If the parts arrive, Becker says. If the factory is not bombed, another adds. If the rail lines are intact, someone else says, laughter bitter. A man down the bench speaks quietly, almost to himself. If we still have fuel. The room goes silent. No one likes speaking aloud what they all know. Germany cannot replace what is lost. Every destroyed tank, every sunk ship, every downed aircraft, it is gone. Replaced only slowly, patched together with dwindling steel, dwindling labor, dwindling hope. But America is stamping ships like tin toys. Dieter writes again. 17 Liberty ships per week. 68 per month. More than 800 in a year. He stops. The pencil drops. It rolls off the table and clatters onto the wooden floor. The men stare at the number. 800. 800 ships to carry tanks, bombs, grain, fuel, troops, across an ocean that Germany cannot cross, cannot stop, cannot sink fast enough. Becker leans back and whispers. We are no longer fighting an army. We are fighting a factory. A guard walking the aisle stops, not because he intends to interrupt, but because he speaks German as well, a second-generation son of immigrants. He has heard this conversation before. He knows the tone, the shock, the realization. You boys don't understand America, he says not unkindly. You think you saw something today? That was one shipyard. One. We've got dozens. He taps the table. And we're still expanding. The POWs look up at him, searching his face for any sign of exaggeration. There is none. He continues, voice steady. You know why we build so fast? Because every worker out there, every woman, every man, every retiree who came back to weld, they believe this matters. They believe this ends the war sooner. They believe they are part of it. He pauses. In Germany, you fear your factories will be bombed. He gestures toward the distant direction of Richmond, toward the glow of furnaces and sparks reflected in the night sky. In America, our factories shine like beacons. With that, he resumes walking. Becker watches him go. No one speaks. Not because there is nothing to say, but because there is too much to say, and no one knows how to begin. Outside, a freight train whistles, another line of steel, lumber, engines, welding rod and plate, heading toward the shipyard. Heading toward another Liberty ship. Another blow in a war Germany is already losing. April 1943. Richmond Shipyard No. 2. The fog has only just lifted, a pale morning haze rising from the water, revealing the metal skeleton of a ship in mid-berth. The air carries the sharp scent of heated steel, fresh paint, and salt from the bay. The German POWs stand in a neat line, boots sunk slightly into damp gravel. Their hands are tucked behind their backs, not bound, just instructed. A guard walks alongside, but there is no tension here. They are not here as laborers. They are here as witnesses. One of the Kaiser shipyard foremen, a short man in oil-stained coveralls named Frank Mallory, steps forward. He wipes his hands on a rag, then gestures upward. Above them, on scaffolding rising 4 stories high, workers swarm the hull of a Liberty ship. Sparks rain down like falling stars where welding torches carve molten lines into steel plate seams. The clang of rivet guns echoes like artillery. To many of the Germans, the sight is almost unthinkable. They were soldiers. These are civilians, thousands of them. Women, some middle-aged, some barely 18, swinging hammers confidently. Old men in flat caps checking weld lines with chalk. Machinists moving in teams, hand signals smooth and memorized. No one stops. No one looks tired. The ship is more than half formed, yet it has only been 9 days since they first saw its keel laid. One German POW, Sergeant Karl Weiss, steps forward, unable to help himself. His voice is low, thick with disbelief. Where are your engineers? Where are your supervisors? Who directs all of this? Mallory laughs, not mocking, just amused by how much they misunderstand. You're looking at him. He points to a woman with a bandana tied around her hair, goggles pushed up on her forehead, checking measurements at a seam joint. Sarah there? Housewife. Husband's in the Pacific. She learned welding 6 months ago. He points to an older man tightening bolts with a pneumatic wrench twice his age. That's Bill. Retired railroad mechanic. Came back to help. He points toward a distant group operating a crane. Those? High school kids. Part-time. Work here evenings after class. The Germans stare stunned. In their home factories, work was rigid, strict hierarchy, limited training, slow apprenticeship, centralized design. Replacing lost labor was nearly impossible. Here, anyone who could lift, think, and follow precision steps became part of the machine. No mystique. No mystery. Just repeatable skill. Liberty ships weren't crafted. They were assembled. A POW in the back, Lieutenant Otto Kramer, formerly of Panzer Reserves, speaks quietly. Not craftsmanship, mass production. Mallory hears him. Nods. Exactly. Why swallows? And the ships, they hold trucks? Tanks? Planes? Mallory scratches his chin. Well, depends on what we load. But yeah, could be fuel. Could be grain. Could be ammo. Could be men. He pats the hull. This baby here? She'll go to England. Then back. Then again. And again. Long as she stays afloat. A gust of wind rolls across the yard, carrying the deep, resonant blast of a ship's horn from somewhere beyond. A completed Liberty ship sliding out toward sea. The men instinctively turn toward the sound. They watch as another steel giant, already crewed, already painted and provisioned, glides slowly into the bay, bound for open water and war. The water churns white behind it. Even from a distance, it looks unstoppable. A factory worker beside them raises a hand to shield her eyes, watching it go. "Another one," she murmurs. Her voice is tired but proud. Weiss looks at the ship leaving port. He thinks of the Eastern Front, roads of mud, tanks breaking down, fuel shortages, horses hauling artillery like it was 1914 again. He whispers aloud, barely audible. "We cannot win this." No one disagrees. And for the first time since the war began, the Germans understand not defeat in battle, but defeat in capacity. They are outnumbered, outbuilt, outrun by a nation that is not just fighting a war, but producing one. Late April 1943. The POW transport truck rattles along the road back toward the camp. Dust rises behind it, drifting into the warm afternoon air. The German prisoners sit on the wooden benches inside, silent, hands resting on their knees. The conversation from the shipyard lingers, unspoken but heavy. Sergeant Karl Weiss stares out the open slat at the landscape passing by. Row after row of warehouses. Rail lines stretching straight into the horizon. Train cars stacked with coal and timber. Trucks carrying crates of machinery. A never-ending movement of supply. Not chaos. Not desperation. A rhythm. A system. At the center of it all, America's factories. The truck slows as it approaches a rail crossing. A train thunders past. The POWs watch as it rattles by. Dozens of flat cars loaded with steel plate, boilers, pre-cut hull sections, crane assemblies, everything needed to build another Liberty ship. Weiss counts the cars under his breath. 30, 40, 50. Keeps going. 60, 70. The train doesn't end. Even the American guard stops speaking and simply watches. One POW finally breaks the silence. "How many trains do they run?" he asks quietly. The guard shrugs. "Hundreds a day. Maybe more." The Germans look at each other. Not in anger. Not in fear. In resignation. Back at Camp White, the prisoners gather outside the barracks as evening falls. The horizon glows orange from the glare of Richmond's shipyards still welding under floodlights. The sight is surreal, like watching a city build weapons out of pure light. Weiss sits with Becker on the barrack steps. "They do not run out," Becker says quietly. "Not of steel, not of labor, not of fuel, not of food." Weiss nods. "The Reich must choose what it builds," Becker continues. "A battleship or a dozen tanks. A tank or 10 artillery pieces. One choice always steals from another." Weiss finishes the thought. "But America chooses everything." A younger POW, barely 20, approaches hesitantly. "We still have the spirit to fight," he says, though his voice wavers. Becker looks up at him, not with cruelty but with something like pity. "Spirit," he says gently, "kills a man when there is no bread to follow it." The younger soldier looks away. Just beyond the fence, an American truck arrives. Workers in overalls step down, laughing, passing boxed lunches to each other. Dinner break. They are exhausted, soot-covered, yet full of energy. They eat meat sandwiches, apples, and thermoses of hot coffee. The Germans watch. Their own supper tonight will be the same as always, plenty of stew, bread, and coffee. Enough to work, think, and live. The irony is not lost. German POWs in America are eating better than German soldiers in the field. Better than German civilians under blackout and ration cards. Better than the factory workers producing tanks by hand in freezing workshops. Weiss thinks again of the shipyard foreman who said, "We're not building ships. We're building an ending." For the first time, Weiss understands the truth. Germany is not being defeated by armies. Germany is being outproduced. Massively. Mechanically. Unstoppably. The war's outcome will not be decided in the trenches, but on the assembly line. In the glow of shipyards that never sleep. And as the sun sinks behind the horizon, the men sit in silence. The war is still raging. But for them, tonight is the night they realize it is already lost. May 10, 1943. Washington, D.C. A conference room inside the War Production Board. Maps cover the walls, global shipping routes, supply chains, oil allocations. Charts show factory output rising month after month. Men in suits and uniforms move from table to table, reviewing tonnage reports, ship numbers, rail schedules. No glory speeches. No dramatic commands. Just planning. Precise. Mathematical. Unrelenting. At the center stands Henry Kaiser, the industrialist responsible for the West Coast shipyards that have stunned the POWs. He gestures to a chalkboard showing the newest construction statistic. One Liberty ship every 4.5 days. He taps the board once. We can do better. A murmur moves across the room. Even the Navy officers, hardened by months of brutal convoy losses, look up. Better? 4 days to build an entire ocean-going vessel, and he wants better? Kaiser continues. Our workers know the process. The welding teams are synchronized. The components are arriving pre-cut and pre-formed. All we need is more slipways, more cranes, and double-shift rotations. Someone asks the question. How many more workers will we need? Kaiser answers without hesitation. All of them. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in the Atlantic, convoys of Liberty ships stretch across the ocean like moving steel continents. Each ship carries tanks, ammunition, food, medicine, aircraft, gasoline, everything needed to keep entire armies alive and advancing. The German U-boat crews watch through their periscopes in disbelief. No matter how many convoys they attack, no matter how many ships sink, more arrive. More always arrive. The convoy system becomes a steel artery pumping endless lifeblood into Europe. A U-boat captain writes in his patrol diary, "We sink one. The Americans build 3 more. The ocean is no longer ours." Back at Camp White, the German POWs receive new work assignments. This time they are helping to clear timber for an expanding rail spur west of the shipyard. The symbolic weight is not lost on them. They are now helping build the path that will feed the machine that is building ships that are supplying the war that will defeat their homeland. Weiss works quietly, pushing a saw through a pine trunk. Each stroke is steady, dull, rhythmic. The sound of industry whispers constantly in the distance. Hammers, saws, engines, cranes. Every sound means another ship, another convoy, another push across the world. One evening, a U.S. Army captain visits the camp administration office. He signs a document and leaves. The paper reads, "Authorization to transfer POW labor to new shipyard development zone. Increased capacity target, 24 new hulls per month." When future historians study how the war was won, they will write of battles. Normandy, Midway, Stalingrad. But those who lived inside the war will know a different truth. Victory began here. In a shipyard. In a factory. In assembly lines where sparks flew like stars. With welders whose names will never be remembered, but whose work changed the world. The German prisoners lie awake that night, staring at the barracks ceiling. The glow of the shipyard lights flickers faintly through the windows. They have seen the future. And it is steel, smoke, and motion. A war not of heroes and legends, but of systems and capacity. The kind of war Germany was never prepared to fight. And now, it is too late to change it. July 12, 1943. Kaiser Shipyards, Richmond, California. A humid morning fog clings low over the bay, rolling like breath across the hull of Liberty ship SS Robert E. Peary, though few recognize it by name yet. Most of the shipyard workers refer to it simply as the experiment. Thousands of men and women stand elbow to elbow along the railings, catwalks, scaffolds, and gravel lots surrounding the slipway. Welders still wearing heavy masks push up the visors to see better. Riveters wipe the sweat from their brows. Office clerks lean out of open windows. Even the German POW work detail has been positioned on a marked line behind a row of guards, allowed to watch. Word has traveled fast. A ship, an entire ocean-going freighter, is about to be built in less than 5 days. Not assembled, not repaired, built. From steel plates to sailing vessel. The workers feel the electricity of the moment, not patriotic speeches, not trumpet fanfare, but one collective truth. They know they are doing something the world has never seen. A whistle shrieks. The shift begins. Forklifts roar. Sparks burst from scaffolds. Giant cranes pivot overhead with groaning steel chorus. Sections of hull, already pre-welded into blocks, swing through the air like monolithic puzzle pieces. Women in overalls and bandanas guide the alignment with hand signals. Sharp, clear, confident. They do not speak. They do not need to. The work is muscle memory now. The ship grows in real time. It is not built piece by piece. It emerges. One German prisoner, Hauptmann Ernst Weiss, watches with quiet astonishment. His hands hang still at his sides. "This cannot be real," he whispers in German. Beside him, Lieutenant Friedrich Keller, younger, more stubborn, shakes his head. "No. This is propaganda. They have been preparing this ship for months. They are staging it." A U.S. guard, overhearing, turns slightly toward them. His voice is calm, not mocking. "It started 4 days ago. You can check the logs." Keller opens his mouth, closes it, looks away. Weiss continues to watch. The truth is undeniable. At the end of the day, a factory whistle sounds, signaling shift change. But no one leaves. The night crew is already there, standing at their stations, gloved hands ready. They do not wait for applause. They just step forward and continue. Welding torches spark the night sky, throwing white-hot light across the steel skeleton. The hull glows like molten bone. The air fills with the metallic scent of heat and sweat. Even time itself seems to be bending. By the dawn of the fifth day, crowds gather again, bigger than before. Journalists, city residents, soldiers, engineers from Washington sent to observe. And the German POWs are brought forward once more. Because the U.S. officers want them to see this. Not out of cruelty, but because this is the battlefield that will decide the war. A final weld is completed. A whistle blows. Sirens sound. Flags rise. The ship slides down the slipway, massive, unstoppable, graceful. The ocean receives it. A cheer erupts, not triumphant, not boastful, but exhausted. A cheer that says, "We can do this. We can make more. We will not run out." Weiss watches the ship disappear into the bay. He does not blink. His voice is low. "Friedrich, it is over. We just have not lost yet." Keller does not answer. Because for the first time, he believes it too. That evening, the German POW camp is quiet. No card games. No heated arguments about tactics, honor, or Hitler's inevitable victory. The men sit on their bunks, mess tins untouched, the smell of warm beans and bread going cold in the air. The barracks is lit by a single hanging bulb, swaying gently, casting long shadows across the wooden walls. Hauptmann Ernst Weiss sits on the lower bunk, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, staring down at the dirt between his boots. Around him, the captured officers speak in subdued tones. Nothing like the proud, defiant confidence they carried when they first arrived in America. The day's lesson weighs on them heavier than any battlefield defeat. They had seen it with their own eyes. America could create what Germany could not even imagine. Lieutenant Keller finally breaks the silence. "We always believed the Americans were soft," he says. "Undisciplined. Wasteful. Dependent on machines because they lacked fighting spirit." He lets out a breath, more a sigh than a laugh. "And yet, this." His voice breaks off. Another prisoner, Oberfeldwebel Henke, leans back against his bunk post. "It is the machine that wins the war," he says quietly. "But the machine is not the steel. It is the system. The speed. The scale." Weiss nods slowly. "Kaiser has built a war factory," he murmurs. "Not a shipyard. A factory for oceans. We thought our tanks were marvels, but we build them one at a time by hand. We believed craftsmanship would save us." He shakes his head. "It will not." Outside the barracks, they can hear the faint, distant rumble of the shipyard continuing through the night. America does not sleep. Not during this war. Keller looks up, meeting Weiss's eyes. "When we go home, if we go home, what will be left of Germany?" Weiss doesn't answer right away. He stands, walks to the small window at the far wall. Beyond the fence, beyond the guard towers, the glow of forges and welding torches flicker against the low clouds like industrial lightning. Finally he speaks. "In the end, this is not a war of soldiers. It is a war of factories. And we have already lost ours." The silence that follows is total. Not despair. Not grief. Just the cold, honest understanding of reality. For the first time since the war began, the German officers stop imagining how they will win, and begin wondering why they ever believed they could. The next morning, the camp wakes before sunrise. A dull orange glow sits low on the horizon, filtered through coastal fog. The air smells faintly of salt and iron, undertones of the massive shipyard just beyond the hill. The prisoners stand in loose formation, boots on gravel, breath steaming faintly in the cold air. But something is different. Not in the routine roll call, head count, guards pacing, the dull clicking of rifle slings. The difference is internal. Gone is the unconscious alignment of shoulders and chins, those tiny invisible gestures of belief, those reflexes drilled into them by years of speeches, posters, marching songs, and radio broadcasts. They stand not like soldiers of a rising empire, but like men beginning to understand its fall. As Weiss faces forward, he remembers Berlin not as it was in propaganda films, but as he last saw it. Queues for bread. Bridges covered in anti-aircraft balloons. The sky always humming with distant engines, never friendly ones. He remembers the frantic rebuilding after bombing raids, roads rerouted with rubble, factories moved underground, workshops scattering into forests and barns to hide from the enemy in the sky. Meanwhile here, in America, they build ships in the open, boldly, fearlessly, without interruption, without fear, without rushing. War for them is a challenge, not a siege. A guard, Corporal Thomas Avery, young, maybe 22, freckled, relaxed in posture but alert in the eyes, walks down the line. He speaks to them every morning, not out of duty but curiosity. "You men ever seen a ship that big go up so fast?" he asks casually, not mocking, simply conversing. Hanky shakes his head. "No," he answers plainly. "In Germany we could not build so quickly even in peace." Avery nods, hands in his pockets. "Well, that's the thing. We didn't either. Not until we stopped building them like ships." He kicks a pebble with his boot. "Mr. Kaiser figured out if you treat a ship like a product, something you assemble rather than craft, you can make as many as you want. Like cars. Like refrigerators." Weiss's brow furrows. The simplicity of the idea is almost insulting. But yet, it works. Avery continues, shrugging. "America's not winning because we're smarter. Or braver. Or better." He pauses. "We're just big. And we decided to stay awake." A silence follows. A silence with weight. The Germans do not respond. They don't need to. They already understand. They had believed the war to be a test of courage and spirit. But now they see it clearly. Germany is outnumbered not on the battlefield, but on the assembly line. A distant horn bellows across the landscape, the start of shift signal at the shipyard. It rolls over the hills like the call of some colossal mechanical beast awakening to march again. Thousands of workers answer. The Germans stand still. For the first time they feel small. Not as men, but as a nation. Weiss turns his head slightly, just enough to see Keller beside him. No words are exchanged. None are needed. The collapse of an empire does not begin with surrender. It begins with understanding. And today they understood. The column of prisoners is marched down the dirt road again, this time slower, quieter. Gravel crunches beneath boots. Seagulls call overhead. And beyond the ridge, the rhythmic metallic thunder of industry rolls like a heartbeat through the morning haze. They crest the rise. The shipyard is already alive. Welders scatter sparks across steel plates, cranes swing massive beams into position, trucks move in synchronized lines like ants in a hive. Steam rises from the boilers, mixing with fog to form a shimmering haze that hangs over the water like smoke from a battlefield. But this is no battlefield. This is power. Controlled. Organized. Unstoppable. Keller watches a fuselage panel, longer than a train car, maneuvered by a crane so smoothly it seems weightless. He whispers almost reverently. "In Germany, we would need a month just to get that piece transported." Weiss says nothing. He is looking past the workers. At the dock numbers painted on the piers. 62. 63. 64. 65. Dock after dock. Slip after slip. Production line after production line. Each one building a ship. Each ship capable of crossing the Atlantic. Each one carrying armor, fuel, guns, ammunition, food, vehicles. Everything an army needs to move across continents. And they are building them faster than Germany can sink them. A siren sounds. Lunch break. Workers, men and women both, stream from the scaffolding. And that is the next shock. Women. Thousands of them. In welding masks and boiler suits. Laughing, talking, wiping grease from their faces. Not just assisting in offices or factories. They are the workforce. In Germany, women were told their role was home and family. The kitchen. The cradle. The hearth. Here they build the weapons of war. And they build fast. Suddenly, the phrase they had once heard in propaganda broadcasts hits them with new weight. America fights with factories. They had thought it was arrogance. But it is truth. An older POW, Sergeant Franz Muller, once a factory foreman in Munich, speaks quietly, his voice cracking. "It's not that our soldiers are worse. Or our engineers. Or our machines." He gazes across the harbor, eyes reflecting the skeletal frame of a half-built Liberty ship. "It's that we are fighting a country that can replace everything. Every tank. Every plane. Every soldier. Every ship." He swallows. "And we cannot." No one corrects him. No one argues. No one even breathes. Because there, before them, in steel, steam, and labor, they see their defeat made visible. A Liberty ship horn sounds, long, deep, triumphant. Workers cheer as the massive hull slides into the Pacific, water curling and crashing around it. The shipyard foreman raises a hand, signaling another crew to move forward. The message is clear. One is finished. Start the next. Weiss watches the launch, feeling something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not anger. Not bitterness. But acceptance. The war is no longer a contest of bravery. It is a contest of time. And Germany is out of time. The guard waves for the prisoners to move. They turn away. But each man knows without question that what they have seen today will outlive the war. It will echo across the years. Stories told not with pride, but with a kind of stunned disbelief. We thought we could win. And then we saw this. The decisive moment of realization has passed silently, like a cloud across the sun. No explosions. No battles. Just the sound of rivets, cranes, steam, and a ship sliding into the sea. Night settles slowly over the camp, staining the sky in shades of steel and fading smoke. The shipyard sirens are distant now, faint echoes carried over the water on cold Pacific air. The POWs are marched back behind the wire, the sound of their boots dull on the packed earth, their faces drawn and quiet. The laughter, the swagger, the old defiance that once clung to their uniforms, they're gone now. Inside the barracks, the men sit close to the warmth of a small stove. Shadows flicker across their faces. No one speaks at first. Sergeant Muller is the one who finally breaks the silence. "Do you realize," he says softly, "that we watched in one day what would take our shipyard 6 months?" Keller doesn't answer. He's staring into the stove flame, jaw tight, trying to maintain dignity, pride. But the fire reflects the truth in his eyes. He saw it too. Weiss sits on his bunk, elbows on his knees, head bowed. He remembers German posters, bold red ink, eagles, flags, declaring victory through production. But production had meant rationing. Production had meant shortages. Production had meant air raid sirens at midnight and shattered brick in the morning. Here, production looks like abundance. Not desperation. Not exhaustion. But confidence. Private Jurgen, the youngest among them, only 19, speaks with hesitation. If they can build ships like that, how many tanks can they build? The room goes silent. No one wants to say it. But Muller does. Quietly. Almost tenderly. As many as they need. There is no argument. No protest. Just a long, slow exhale of a truth finally accepted. Outside, footsteps crunch across gravel. The guard, Johnson, tall, Tennessee accent, mid-30s, pauses by the barracks window. He doesn't speak German, but he watches the prisoners with an expression that's almost understanding. He knows what they saw today. The Americans intended for them to see it. This wasn't humiliation. It was education. Proof. Industrial warfare is not won on the battlefield. It is won before the first shot is fired. In steel. In factories. In the hands of welders and riveters and mechanics. Dinner is served. Stew. Thick. Hot. Heavy with potatoes. And coffee. Real coffee. Not barley. Not chicory. Not ration powder. The scent fills the barracks, warm and deep. The men eat slowly, thoughtfully, no longer laughing, no longer comparing German victories or telling stories of the Eastern Front. Now they talk in hushed voices. How many Liberty ships were at that yard alone? Were there others? If they can launch one today, how many launch from the East Coast? How many more are being built right now? The answers form themselves without words. Too many. Weiss sets his spoon down. He speaks softly but with a strange calm. This war is already decided. Keller looks up sharply, anger flaring, instinctively defensive. We fight until the end. Wehrmacht does not surrender. Weiss meets his eyes. There is no defeat in his look. Only clarity. We have given everything. And they still have more. Silence again. The stove crackles. Coffee steams. Outside, distant waves break along the shoreline. And in that small moment, the war, so enormous it could swallow continents, feels painfully close. Personal. Human. Unavoidable. The realization arrives not like a thunderbolt, but like a quiet whisper. Germany cannot win. Not because its soldiers are weak. Not because its generals are foolish. But because the factories of another nation are endless. The lights are turned off. Men lie down in their bunks. But not a single one sleeps easily. Their world has changed. And for the first time, they know it. Across the world, on the other side of the ocean, Berlin is burning. Not every night. But often enough that people start sleeping in their basements, boots already on their feet just in case. Factories once loud with machinery now echo with emptiness. Kills are cold. Rails sit twisted in bombed-out yards. Workers salvage what they can from rubble that still smolders. And yet the radio repeats the same confident words. Germany produces more than our enemies. Victory is certain. But the families living under those broadcasts know better. They see the bread grow thinner. The lines grow longer. They see the army request bicycles because they cannot supply fuel. And they hear rumors. Rumors whispered by letters from the front. Letters carried across borders, through sensors, through uniforms. Americans are building ships faster than we build carts. They build tanks like we build stoves. Their factories run day and night. No bombers can reach them. The words move quietly like a cold wind, and they leave frost wherever they go. Meanwhile, in the POW camp, the Germans cannot send letters about what they've seen. But the Americans don't need them to. They want the realization to spread later, slow, steady, inevitable, through the prisoners who return home after the war. A message carved into memory. You were defeated before you set foot on the battlefield. One morning, Lieutenant Keller stands again at the shipyard fence. Another Liberty ship is sliding off its supports into the bay. Flags wave. Workers cheer. A band plays. Not a military parade. Not a political triumph. Just another Tuesday. Keller watches the ship drift out to the water like a leaf carried by the tide, effortless, smooth, casual. He grips the fence tighter. His voice breaks when he speaks. We spent everything on tanks, on guns, on fortresses. We made war our god. They made infrastructure. Behind him, Weiss nods. And that is the difference. That night, the POWs aren't quiet. They talk. Not about Germany, but about America. About the workers. The engineers. The welders who look no different from factory workers back home, yet produce like they have the hands of 10 men. They talk about the food at the camp, the clothes, the medical care. They talk about the idea that has crept into all their minds. Maybe wars aren't won by soldiers. Maybe wars are won by who can replace the soldiers. Who can rebuild faster. Who can produce without fear of bombs overhead. Meanwhile, in Berlin, a general slams a report onto his desk. The report says, Liberty ship production now exceeds 140 per month. He stares at the paper long enough for the ink to blur. He knows what that means. The war has already been decided. Not at Stalingrad. Not in North Africa. Not on the Atlantic. But here. In the quiet revolution of steel and steam, sparks and rivets. In factories where victory is measured in tons rather than territory. Outside the POW barracks, snowfall begins, soft, slow, gentle. The United States seems almost impossibly calm, impossibly safe, impossibly ready. The war is not over. But the outcome is already written. The men in the barracks now understand something that generals are only just beginning to admit. You cannot defeat a nation that can outbuild the war itself. The wind whistles low through the camp that night. Snow gathers in quiet drifts along the fence line, softening the hard edges of barbed wire and watchtower shadows. The compound lights glow in little halos against the cold. Inside Barracks 7B, the stove burns low. A dull orange flicker, nothing more. The German POWs sit close together, not out of camaraderie but out of something heavier. Something they don't want to name. Acceptance. Not surrender of body, they surrendered that long ago. This is surrender of belief. Surrender of the idea that Germany could still win. Hauptmann Weiss sits at the edge of his bunk, hands folded like a man in prayer. He is not praying. Just thinking. Remembering. Marches across snow-covered fields. Convoys breaking down from lack of fuel. Children in villages handing soldiers their last bread. Factories running on fumes. Workers with hollow eyes. The heavy silence of men who know they are losing. He had seen it all. He simply refused to understand it, until now. Lieutenant Keller lies on his side, staring at the wood-paneled wall just inches from his face. His voice is quiet, almost too soft to hear. We believe they were weak. Unfocused. Too democratic. Too indulgent. But a weak people cannot build like that. Weiss responds without turning. We thought discipline was strength. He pauses. But it was freedom. A long silence follows. The kind that changes men. In another corner, Oberfeldwebel Henke draws shapes in the dust on the floor with his finger. Not maps. Not battle plans. Just lines. Weld lines. The kind he saw on the hulls of Liberty ships. Clean, fast, efficient. He had never really understood welding before. In Germany, shipyards still used rivets for everything. Slow. Laborious. Traditional. The old way is the best way, the master builders would say. America did not care about tradition. America cared about speed. Henke whispers. They are not better soldiers than us. They are not even better makers than us. They are simply faster. Keller closes his eyes. No. Not faster. Prepared. Weiss stands, pulls on his coat and pushes open the barracks door. Cold air floods in. The yard is empty. Quiet. The watchtower light sweeps slowly across snow and fence and road. He walks toward the fence, same one he stood at that morning and the morning before that. But tonight he is not looking for ships. He is looking for meaning. Somewhere far beyond the harbor lights, beyond the coastline, beyond even the horizon, another Liberty ship is already on its way to Europe. Loaded with food, fuel, artillery, vehicles, medicine, hope for one side, despair for the other. One ship does not matter. But thousands? Thousands mean something else entirely. They mean that the war is no longer a contest of courage. It is a contest of capacity. Weiss exhales, watching his breath turn to vapor. It is over, he says. No drama. No defeat. Just truth. Behind him, Keller steps outside, boots crunching in snow. Not yet, Keller whispers. But soon. Weiss nods. The guard in the tower watches but does not intervene. He has seen this moment before. The moment prisoners stop dreaming of escape and start preparing to return home to a country that no longer exists in the way they remember. Inside the barracks, the stove crackles. Outside, the wind carries the distant echo of shipyard whistles. Another shift beginning, steel being cut, engines being fitted, rivets being replaced by blazing arcs of welding flame. America continues to build. And Germany continues to understand. Slowly, painfully, irreversibly. The next morning arrives with a low gray sky and the smell of rain drifting in from the sea. The German POWs file out of the barracks for morning roll call, boots crunching on gravel dampened by the night frost. The guards count heads. Orders are given. The routine unfolds as it always does. But the way the prisoners look at the world has changed. Their eyes are drawn not to the fences or the towers, but to the skyline. Beyond the camp, the shipyard still roars with life. Cranes swing slowly through the mist, their iron arms towering over half-finished hulls. Sparks shower from welding torches like falling stars. Diesel engines rumble. Steam whistles. Hammers ring. It is not the sound of chaos. It is the sound of coordination. The sound of scale. Far down the dock, a group of American workers gathers around a new Liberty ship, its hull still black with fresh weld seams. The workers stand shoulder to shoulder, not in military formation but in confident unity. Men and women both, some wearing heavy coats, others in overalls with sleeves rolled up to reveal muscled arms streaked with grease and sweat. German eyes follow them. They work differently. No overseers shouting. No fear. No urgency born of desperation. Just pace. Rhythm. Focus. A machine made of people. Hauptmann Weiss feels something tighten in his chest. Not anger. Not jealousy. Recognition. This is what Germany had once imagined itself to be. A nation of disciplined labor, working with purpose toward a shared victory. But somewhere along the way the purpose had been twisted, corrupted, chained to a brutal ideology that drained rather than inspired. Here, on this open coast under low clouds, purpose feels different. Sure. Voluntary. Chosen. The difference is subtle, but powerful. As the prisoners continue to watch, a siren sounds, not a warning but a celebration. The workers cheer. A foreman waves his cap and shouts toward the docks. Launch day. That Liberty ship, the one welded under the eyes of the Germans since their arrival, is about to enter the water. German boots shuffle forward involuntarily. Even the guards allow it, they want the prisoners to see. A brass band appears from nowhere. Children climb onto their fathers' shoulders. Women wrap arms around husbands in blue work jackets. The town gathers. No uniforms. No propaganda banners. No choreographed triumph. Just pride. The simple, quiet pride of building something that matters. The wooden blocks supporting the ship are knocked away one by one. The crowd counts down. 5, 4, 3. The massive hull slides forward. Slow at first, then faster, smoother, guided by grease and rails and gravity. Water erupts outward in a great white plume as the ship settles into its new element. A wave crashes against the seawall, spraying workers and POWs alike. Men laugh. Children squeal. The guards don't stop it. And the Germans? They simply stand and watch. Silent. Some smiling. Some scowling. Some hollowed by realization. Lieutenant Keller whispers, almost in awe. They launch ships, the way we launch artillery batteries. Weiss nods slowly. And they do it every week. He doesn't have to say the next part. We cannot stop this. To the Americans this is just another workday. Another launch. Another ship. But to the POWs, this moment becomes memory. A memory that will follow them long after the war. A memory they will tell their children. A memory that will explain why Germany lost. Not because of bravery, Not because of leadership. Not even because of strategy. But because of production. Because of the machine that America became. A machine powered not by fear, but by belief. The wave that splashes over the seawall recedes slowly, leaving dark streaks of moisture across the concrete. The cheers from the crowd fade into conversation, laughter, and the clanging of tools as workers return to their stations. The Liberty ship, now afloat, rocks gently in the harbor, its bow pointed toward the open Pacific. The German POWs remain where they stand, staring. Some are shaking their heads. Some are simply quiet. All of them understand something they hadn't before. The guards don't rush them. They don't bark commands. They allow the silence to settle. It is, in its way, a lesson. Hauptmann Weiss stands near the chain-link fence, fingers resting lightly against the cold steel. His jaw is tight, his gaze fixed on the ship. There is fatigue in his posture, not of the body but of the spirit. Beside him, Lieutenant Keller finally breaks the quiet. We were told they were lazy, undisciplined, unfocused. Weiss nods once. A slow, tired nod. We were told wrong. He closes his eyes briefly. Not in shame, but in acceptance. Because the truth is no longer something that can be ignored, no matter how deeply it contradicts the propaganda they were raised on. Down by the docks, a group of American workers light cigarettes. They laugh about the weather. About baseball. About who owes who $1 if the shipyard can beat its launch schedule next month. To them this is not heroic. It is simply normal. Yet the Germans understand now that normal here is what makes it extraordinary. In Germany, industry had become a battlefield of its own. Factories bombed. Supply lines strained. Labor controlled by fear and punishment. But here, machines are plentiful. Materials are abundant. And workers believe they are building something important, not just for war but for the world afterward. Hope, not fear, fuels the production line. One of the younger POWs, barely 18, points at the newly launched ship, his voice trembling. How many more do they have? A guard hears him. He answers calmly. Over 2,000 so far. More every month. The number settles into the German ranks like a weight. 2,000. They had seen photographs of American fleets. They had heard rumors. But hearing it is different than seeing it. This is not a nation struggling to keep up. This is a nation accelerating. Weiss lowers his hand from the fence, straightens his posture, and turns slightly toward Keller. When we return to Germany, if we return, we must tell them the truth. Keller's expression darkens. Because he knows that truth will not be believed. And those who try to speak it are rarely thanked. He exhales, voice flat. No one will listen. Weiss looks back at the Liberty ship moving steadily across the harbor, pushed by tugboats toward its first cargo. They will. One day. It is not a statement of hope. It is a statement of inevitability. A whistle blows in the distance. Roll call is ending. Work details are being reassigned. Routine returns. But the world inside the minds of the German POWs no longer matches the world they knew before. They woke today as soldiers of a nation still fighting for victory. They walk back to camp understanding that the war is already lost. Just not yet on the battlefield. They return to their barracks. But they carry something with them now. Perspective. The kind that can't be forced. The kind that changes a person quietly, permanently. The kind that will outlast uniforms, fences, and war itself. The barracks are dim by the time the work crews return. Evening sunlight filters through dusty windows in long golden beams that cut across the wooden floorboards. The smell of pine, old canvas, and sweat lingers in the room. Metal bed frames squeak softly as men sit down, remove boots, loosen collars. It is quiet. Not the usual exhausted quiet but something heavier. The German POWs do not speak at first. They just sit, each man holding in the same thought, the same realization that no one is willing to say aloud. Finally, Keller breaks the silence. It was not just the ship, he says softly. It was how they built it. Weiss sits across from him, elbows on his knees, fingers interlaced tightly. He nods. Yes. Another soldier, Schmidt, pulls a cigarette from his shirt pocket. His hands shake slightly as he lights it. The workers, they were smiling. Laughing. No overseers with rifles. No threats. No posters screaming loyalty. He exhales, smoke curling slowly upward. They wanted to be there. A younger POW, barely past 19, clenches his jaw. In Germany, if we refuse the factory. He does not finish the sentence. He doesn't have to. Everyone in the room knows the consequences. Weiss finally speaks, not as an officer issuing orders, but as a man having a realization. We believe that discipline came from fear. That obedience made us strong. He raises his gaze. But they are stronger than us. Because they choose to work. They choose to build. The barracks is silent. A thought hangs in the air, unspoken but understood. What if the war was never about bravery or willpower, but about the ability to produce, sustain, adapt? And the Americans were simply better prepared to do that. Outside, an American guard walks past the window humming a song, lazy, relaxed, casual. He taps his baton against his leg like a man with nothing to worry about. The war feels distant here. Because America does not fight from desperation. It fights from abundance. Private Faber, who has barely spoken in weeks, leans forward. We believed we could win by being harder, tougher, more disciplined. His voice cracks slightly, not with fear or grief but with comprehension. But they win by being smarter. By being more. Weiss looks at him. Not smarter, he corrects gently. More prepared. He stands slowly and walks toward the window, where the last red sliver of sun dips below the shipyard cranes. This war was decided before the first shot was fired. No one argues. Because now, having seen the Liberty ship launched in a single day, having seen thousands of workers operate in perfect, voluntary coordination, having seen industry that moves like a machine of millions, they know it is true. The lamps flicker. The night insects hum. Boots settle under beds. The men lie down. No one prays. No one dreams of victory. Tonight the war feels different. Not because of defeat, but because understanding has arrived. Understanding that wars are not won by ideology. They are won by the ability to build faster, move faster, supply faster. And America can do all three. Late autumn 1944. Columbia River Basin, Oregon. A cold wind rolled in off the water, carrying the sharp scent of steel, oil, and river sediment. The sky overhead was a pale gray dome, clouds layered like wool blankets pressing down on the earth. Beneath them, the Kaiser shipyard moved with its usual relentless rhythm. Hammers ringing, cranes squealing, welding torches spitting bright arcs of white fire. Sparks flew like miniature starbursts and drifted down, dying on concrete still warm from the day shift. A group of German POWs stood together under the supervision of a single U.S. military guard, their breath forming wispy clouds in the cold air. They wore heavy work jackets issued at the camp, patched at the elbows, still carrying the faint smell of camp soap. Most of them were former Wehrmacht engineers, factory workers, and armored crewmen, men who prided themselves on German precision, on engineering that was supposed to be the envy of the world. They had come to understand in recent months that their understanding of the world had been dangerously incomplete. Today they were being allowed to observe a new Liberty ship nearing completion. The POWs had been watching its progress since the keel was laid 3 weeks before. 3 weeks. They all knew the number. They all said it quietly among themselves. 3 weeks. The ship now towered over them, vast, angular, not beautiful, but undeniable. Its steel plates were already sealed. Deck structures were in place. Machinery was being lowered in through open hatches by cranes whose operators moved with confident ease. Teams of welders crawled across scaffolding like tireless ants, arcs of flame flickering across their helmets. One of the German POWs, Senior Sergeant Emil Kranz, formerly of the 4th Panzer Division's Logistical Corps, stared up at it with a face carved from disbelief. Before the war, he had worked at a Krupp steelworks plant outside Essen. He knew production schedules. He knew what it took to shape steel and build machinery that had to withstand the violence of war. Back home, building even a medium tank, an ordinary Panzer IV, took months. Materials had to be sourced across Germany and occupied territories. Parts developed in specialist factories. Assembly done by hand. Rivets, bolts, forgings, all overseen by small teams of craftsmen. Here. They were building an entire ocean-crossing cargo ship, out of welded components, using workers who rotated in shifts around the clock, some of whom had never worked in manufacturing before the war began. And they were finishing 3 of them this month alone. Emil swallowed hard and clenched his gloves. He felt something sink inside him. Beside him, another prisoner, Johannes Vetter, formerly a tank mechanic, spoke in a low, hoarse whisper. Back home, we cannot replace our machines fast enough. Our factories, bombed, scattered, starving for coal. And here. He lifted his chin, gesturing vaguely. Here they build these as if they are toys. The American guard didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. He understood the moment. He had seen it before. There was a shift that happened among German POWs, not immediately, not loud, but slow, silent, and heavy. It was the recognition of something the German officers had promised would never happen. That Germany had been outproduced. Not outfought. Not outstrategized. Outbuilt. A young American welder, no older than 19, hopped down from a scaffold, wiped his mask off with a rag and tossed a grin to a crewmate. He moved with the unthinking confidence of someone who believed, matter-of-factly, in the inevitability of victory. He had grown up in the Great Depression, picking apples, turning wrenches, doing whatever work there was. And now he was building a ship that would travel across the world. The German POWs watched him, realizing that the United States was not struggling to build weapons of war. It was thriving in war. Feeding workers well. Paying them. Training them. Scaling them. America had done what Germany's leadership believed was impossible. It had turned war production into something resembling an assembly line for automobiles. And then improved it. In Emil's mind he saw a map of Europe. He saw the front lines pushing closer to Berlin. He saw German factories running on fumes. He thought of his brother fighting in Hungary. He thought of his mother standing in ration lines. He looked up at the Liberty ship again, its hull number freshly stenciled, its future already determined. It would carry food, ammunition, fuel, trucks, even locomotives across the Atlantic. It would bring everything needed to grind the Third Reich into dust. He felt his breath leave him slowly. "This is how we lose," he said quietly. Johannes didn't reply. He didn't need to. The American guard glanced at them, reading their expressions, and spoke, softly, not unkindly. "You boys were brave. You fought hard. But war isn't just one out there." He pointed to the ship, towering over them like a monument to inevitability. "It's one here." Not a single German POW argued. Not anymore. They had just seen the truth built in steel. Winter, 1944-45. Along the eastern seaboard, from Maryland to California's western shipyards, the United States industrial engine roared without pause. The sky hung low over the Kaiser yards that morning, mist rolling in from the river, fog coiling around the scaffolds like pale smoke. Even through the haze, the pounding rhythm of work never stopped. Power hammers ringing in steady tempo, cranes groaning overhead, diesel engines coughing to life before settling into a deep industrial rumble. The German POWs had returned to their work crews, but something had changed. The quiet conversations in German, once laced with boasts or defiance, had become subdued. There was no more talk of our secret weapons, or the Reich rolling back the Allied front. No more confidence that Berlin had a plan. Because now they had seen numbers that could not be denied. One Liberty ship. Built in 3 weeks. And the Americans were doing this dozens of times a month. One of the U.S. supervisors, a middle-aged foreman named Bill Hargrove, leaned against a crate of rivets with a cigarette hanging from the corner of his mouth. He wasn't military. Just a shipyard man, one of millions. He wasn't trying to brag, but he explained it plainly to the POWs, his voice rough from smoke and steel dust. "You see, fellas, we don't build these like fancy watches. We build them like farm tools. Strong. Simple. Replaceable." He flicked ash to the ground. "And we got more steel than we know what to do with. Railroads bringing it day and night. Mines running full tilt. Whole towns building nothing but valves, engines, gears, wiring. Everybody works. Women, men, kids fresh out of school. We don't stop." He took another drag. "That's the difference." The Germans listened, not because they wanted to, but because everything they had seen aligned with his words. A POW named Otto Weiss, who had once worked at the Henschel Tank Works in Kassel, closed his eyes as he pictured his old factory. Half of it had been flattened by RAF bombs. What remained had been patched together with plywood and sheet metal, like a barn in winter. Workers there labored to repair machines older than the war itself, starving for coal and electricity. Every part required precision. Every tank took time. Time Germany no longer had. Here, Otto watched Americans weld instead of rivet, faster, cheaper, strong enough. He saw parts arrive ready to fit, not custom milled, just taken from a warehouse rack. Interchangeable. Standardized. Germany had mastery of engineering. America had mastery of production. And in war, production was the weapon that mattered most. One of the American welders walked by singing to himself, voice rising through the industrial noise. "We can do it, and we'll do it again." It wasn't a song of pride. It was a song of certainty. Otto felt something twist in his chest, not fear, not anger. Resignation. It was the moment he understood that Germany, his Germany, was already dead. Not because its soldiers were weaker. Not because its tanks were worse. But because it had waged war like a blacksmith forging one sword at a time. Against a nation that had turned its factories into foundries that poured weapons like molten metal into an endless mold. He remembered the propaganda posters in Germany shouting, "Victory through strength." But here was America's message, unspoken and absolute. Victory through quantity. Beside him, Emil, who had once believed in the unstoppable engine of German might, finally spoke, voice barely above the wind. "We were never prepared for this." He didn't say war. He meant a war of industry. He meant a war of resources. He meant a war America was always going to win. The whistle blew. Shift change. Thousands of American workers flooded out of the yards, laughing, joking, wiping sweat from their brows. Families waited for them. Cafeterias waited. Warm beds. Hot coffee. A next shift ready to replace them. The machine never stopped running. And for the first time since the war had begun, the German POWs understood that no amount of battlefield courage could save a nation that was being drowned in steel, fuel, engines, and ships. This was not just a factory. It was a verdict. Spring 1945. The sky was bright that afternoon, the sunlight cutting across the shipyard in long gold-white angles. The clang of steel was steady, rhythmic, less chaotic than in winter. The work crews had settled into routine. German POWs and American workers moved in the same spaces, though separated by uniform and command, by language and history. But they breathed the same salt air. They stood under the same cranes and gantries. They heard the same ship bell signaling shifts and launches. One Liberty ship, hull number welded fresh, loomed over the slipway held aloft by scaffolds and steel supports. It wasn't finished, but already it looked alive, like an animal waiting to be released into the world. The German prisoners were lined up, tool belts over striped jackets, caps pulled against the glare. Their overseer, Sergeant Miller, a quiet man with a permanent squint, walked them toward the rigging station. Among the prisoners was Oberfeldwebel Karl Brenner, a career soldier of the Wehrmacht, captured near Cherbourg. He had fought on the front. He had driven a Panzer IV. He had watched men burn and steel crack and cities shatter. He thought he had seen every kind of warfare a man could witness. But none of it prepared him for this. He whispered to the man beside him, Otto, the former tank factory worker, his voice low. "Back home," Karl said, "to build a single tank chassis, we needed precision steel rollers from Essen, gear plates from Hanover, bearings from Schweinfurt. If one link broke," he made a snapping motion with his fingers. The whole machine stopped. Otto nodded. He didn't need to be told. He had lived it. Here, Karl watched as a forklift rolled by carrying a dozen standardized engine parts, marked by punched code, stacked like groceries, ready to be bolted into a waiting hull without modification. A woman in overalls checked them off a clipboard before they vanished inside the superstructure. No ceremony. No craftsmanship. Just certainty. Karl's jaw tightened. He remembered Berlin speeches calling Americans decadent, lazy, soft. He remembered commanders mocking U.S. manufacturing as soulless. He remembered laughing. He wasn't laughing now. Nearby, two American engineers were speaking loudly over a table of drafting plans. They didn't realize, or didn't care, that the POWs could hear them. "You know what Washington wants next?" one said, tapping the blueprint with a grease-stained finger. "More Liberty ships?" "We can't go faster than this," the other replied. "No," the first one said, leaning in. "They're talking about fleets. Not squadrons. Fleets to cross oceans. Fleets to reshape continents when this is done." Karl felt something freeze in him. This wasn't just war. This was momentum. This was the sense of a nation whose resources didn't simply fuel conflict. They expanded during it. The war wasn't draining America. The war was accelerating it. On the scaffolding above, Emil, the same Emil whose voice had cracked weeks earlier with realization, paused mid-weld. His torch hissed quiet. His face welled with sweat, grime streaking along his cheek. He stared out across the shipyard, hundreds of workers, trucks, cranes, sparks falling like molten snow. He spoke again, just loud enough for Karl and Otto to hear. "Do you know what my brother is eating back home?" he asked, voice hollow. "Turnips. Water. Bread so thin you can see light through it. And he's working 14 hours in a cold factory. They call that sacrifice." Karl's throat tightened. He thought of home. Of his mother. Of Dresden. Of smoke. Of what the news reports did not say. Otto exhaled long and slow. "These people," he said quietly, "are fighting a different kind of war." Karl looked at him. "What kind is that?" Otto turned his face toward the towering Liberty ship, gleaming with fresh welds. "A war of endlessness." There was no anger in his tone. No bitterness. Just truth. A Liberty ship didn't need to be beautiful. It didn't need prestige. It didn't need complexity. It only needed to exist. And America could make them exist by the hundreds, faster than Germany could replace tanks lost by the dozens. Sergeant Miller called the work crew forward. "All right, gentlemen, back at it." His voice wasn't harsh. There was no triumph in it. Just work to be done. Work that didn't stop. As Carl attached his harness and clipped into the scaffold, he paused, placing a gloved hand on the warm steel of the ship's hull. It felt like touching the side of something inevitable. For the first time since the war began, he felt, not fear, not pride, but clarity. Germany still fought on the battlefield. But the war's outcome was being decided here, among cranes and sparks and conveyor belts and women with clipboards and forklifts moving like clockwork. This was the front line now. And Germany had already lost it. July 12, 1944. Late afternoon. The sun hung low, its light shimmering across the bay like scattered silver. A soft wind rolled in from the Pacific, carrying the smell of brine and burnt metal. Workers wiped sweat from their brows. Welders shut off their torches. Inspectors closed their ledgers. The shipyard, which had been a roar of industry just hours earlier, was settling into a tense quiet. Because today, a Liberty ship was ready for launch. Hundreds of workers gathered along the railings, some still in grease-stained overalls, others wearing Sunday best just for the occasion. American flags hung from cranes. A chaplain stood near the bow waiting to speak. Reporters from the Oakland Tribune raised their cameras. And standing quietly, watched by two guards but offered no restraints, were the German POW work crews. Among them, Karl, Otto, Emil. They stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the ship they had helped assemble, not in pride but in understanding. This was no ordinary vessel. This ship had been built in 43 days. Back in Germany, Karl remembered the last Panzer IV his unit had received before Normandy. It had taken nearly 6 months to produce. 6 months of precision machining, scarce metals, desperate rail shipments, strained labor. 6 months. And here, this great steel giant of the sea had been born in 6 weeks. An American supervisor stepped forward. He was missing 2 fingers on his right hand from a factory accident years earlier. He didn't give speeches. He didn't need to. He simply nodded to the crew. The hull supports loosened. The cradle creaked. The ship began to move. Slow at first. Then faster. The massive Liberty ship slid down the greased ramp, groaning like some leviathan waking from slumber. The water surged upward in white spray. Cameras clicked. Workers cheered. A siren wailed in celebration. The ship hit the water and steadied, rising, settling, corrected by ballast and buoyancy. Alive. A vessel ready to cross an ocean and carry food, fuel, trucks, shells, engines, war itself, to wherever it was needed. Karl watched the waves curl along the hull and felt his knees weaken. Across the slipway, Otto whispered, "Every one of those is worth 10 tanks." But Emil, staring forward jaw tight, answered, "No, not 10. Karl turned to him. Emil continued, voice low and steady. "One of these ships carries the fuel for hundreds, the spare parts for thousands, the food to keep armies marching, the steel to rebuild cities, the power to keep the war alive, no matter what we destroy." He paused, swallowing hard. How do you defeat a country that can rebuild the war faster than you can fight it? It was not a question. It was the truth. Nearby, a group of American dockworkers began to sing, low, off-key, but full of something the POWs recognized instantly. Not arrogance. Not triumph. Momentum. The sense of a nation that had bet everything, and had the power to pay for it. Karl lowered his eyes. He saw the war clearly for the first time. Germany had built weapons. America had built capacity. One could run out. The other could not. A young U.S. Navy lieutenant stepped past the POW group. He didn't look at them with contempt or pity. He simply nodded once, respectfully, because he knew. They understood now. Behind Karl, the wind rustled the POW camp flag. Ahead of him, the Liberty ship moved steadily toward open water, toward a world still burning, but already changing. And in that space between, Karl finally allowed himself to whisper what had once been unthinkable. We were never fighting soldiers. Otto met his eyes. We were fighting factories. The ship blew its horn, deep, thunderous, echoing across the bay like a closing chapter. The war would continue. Men would still fall. Battles would still rage. But its fate had been sealed not by tanks, nor by generals, nor by speeches, but by welders, shipwrights, riveters, machinists, and assembly lines moving day and night. The Liberty ship drifted toward the horizon. And with it carried the undeniable truth. Industrial war belongs to the nation that can outbuild all others.